The name John Tapp is synonymous with horse racing. He's been a broadcaster for many years and he's also a very talented trainer. We're here at his stable setup to meet him and his stable star, Chariot King. Well, John, with the Inter-Dominion just around the corner, what feeling does the Inter-Dominion, the name, the race itself, give you?
I love the Inter-Dominion, Greg, the history, the romantic stories, the tales of good fortune and bad down through the ages. We had the privilege to be in the Inter-Dominion a couple of years ago with Chariot King. He made the final. He had a big setback a week or so before, missed a very important hobble up, and he was simply underdone on the day. But just to be there, to be involved, to have a runner in that grand final was one of life's most precious moments for us.
When you first started training, was it just a dream to have a horse good enough to go in a race like at the Inter-Dominion?
Greg, when I started training, I was excited by the prospect of running in a maiden at Bulli. Truly.
So it's come a long way in that time then?
Well, you can only do it with the right horse, and I've been very, very fortunate to have had some really handy ones, but only one Chariot King. He's a once-in-a-lifetime horse, and I certainly don't expect to be finding another one.
He debuted on the 31st of January 2009. When he went to the races for the first time, were you thinking, I've got a really nice horse here, or were you just hoping to see him perform?
Oh no, he'd shown plenty privately, and in a couple of trials leading up to that Newcastle race. He was still on the green side, obviously, and I wasn't sure where he'd get to in the run or what sort of trouble he might get into. As it turned out, he got into none. I think he was 1 out, 2 back in the run. He just came to the outside and won in very exciting fashion.
He won his first two. His first defeat came in the Linden Huntley Memorial. Now that race was won by 2IC. You ran second to him, but he handled the small track at Bulli so well.
Yeah, he flies around the little tracks. Not a problem for him at all. As he does at home here, my track is 700 metres and he's very comfortable. That Linden Huntley final, he won his heat on the Monday. I think he drew 4 in the final, but we had never led in a race up to that point in time. All he knew was to sit on somebody's back, to peel and dash home. Now he flew the gate, crossed and led, and if I had that over again, we would hold the lead. But because of his inexperience in front, we let 2IC go, and we were never going to catch him. But it might have been a different story had we held the front.
He then went to Bathurst. He won his heat at the Gold Crown Carnival, and then you drew the second row in the grand final. I actually drew the barrier draw for you. I was at the barrier draw and drew the second row. What were your thoughts going into the big race?
Well, you've got to be worried about a second row draw around the old Bathurst track. Won't be such a worry nowadays, of course. But I think he drew 8. Pretty sure he drew behind the 2. We needed a very clever drive, and we got one from the GMAC. Greg Bennett had to go to the Gold Coast to drive Carlu Mick in the Inter-Dominion heats, and Macca was at a loose end, so we snapped him up and he drove the horse perfectly. He came out of the 1-1 up the back straight, and I thought, gee, you might have done that a little bit early, but no sooner had he popped out than the horse in the death seat stopped as though he did a brick wall. So Macca knew what he was doing.
He didn't miss any features as a 2-year-old. I think he went in the APG. I think he went to the Breeders' Crown as well. So you contested a lot of features with him as a 2-year-old.
He ran second to Cut the Attitude in the APG final in Brisbane and got caught outside Cut the Attitude. I still thought he'd win on the turn. Macca tricked me a bit coming around the corner. He looked over his right shoulder to see if there were any dangers. Now that normally means the driver of the death seat horse thinks he's got the leader covered. So that gave me the wrong signal. As soon as they straightened up, it was obvious he was going to have a struggle to get past Cut the Attitude, a game little horse who beat him about a metre.
So at the end of his 2-year-old season, what were you thinking when he comes back? He's a very talented juvenile, but will he make it as a 3, 4 and 5-year-old? Were you thinking that?
Oh, you never know, Greg. He was so precocious. He was such a natural 2-year-old. And had so much speed, and you're never quite sure that that's not all they're going to do. So it was a great relief when into his 3-year-old campaign it was obvious that he was a little bit better, if anything, and he raced very well through his 3-year-old season. He ran in 2 derbies, didn't have much luck in either of them, to be honest. And I think he should have finished closer in the Victoria Derby, won by Courage to Rule, but he did get away with the Breeders' Challenge 3-year-old final, which he deserved to win that year.
And from memory, that was a pretty good drive on that occasion as well.
Well, Macca was very confident and very adamant that he was coming out of the gate no matter what. I think we drew 4 or 5. He said, "I'm pretty sure I can cross these." He said, "I'm coming out humming," were his words. And then he handed up to Cut the Attitude. It worked out perfectly. But I've got to give him credit for sound judgment. He was confident he could cross and then hand up to Cut the Attitude, and that's the way it worked out.
As he got older, he developed an issue with his breathing. I think he went 25 runs between July 2010 and the 4th of August 2012 without a win. But in that time, he spent some time away from the racetrack. Yeah,
he was off the boil, Greg. It was obvious something was amiss. He just wasn't the same horse. He'd lost the spark that he had. One morning, I went to get him out of his yard, and I noticed a twitching sensation on his near side, something I hadn't seen before. I didn't take too much notice. Brought him up to the tie rail, geared him up, worked him, only fair work. Same thing next morning. It was like watching somebody with hiccups. That's the best way I can describe it. And it progressively worsened, and a few weeks later he wasn't just twitching, he was hiccuping out of control. It was diagnosed by the vets as diaphragmatic synchronous flutter, better known as the thumps. They don't know a lot about it. Most vets believe it's caused by some kind of electrolyte imbalance, and the only treatment that seems to help it a little bit is calcium deposits, calcium drip.
Yep.
The intravenous drip, and we had to do that for quite a while after, but he'd be all right one week, it would recur the next. All right the next week, recur the one after. Got him to Menangle one Saturday night, and he was thumping so badly we had to scratch him. It was a very hot night, and that's another thing that the vets believe, that it is exacerbated by extreme heat. So he wasn't a summertime horse at that point.
So when he was diagnosed with this condition, did you think that was career over? It was going to be the end of the road for him?
Well, he'd been so good to us. I couldn't bear the thought of pushing on with him under those circumstances, and with the discomfort that he was obviously experiencing. We spoke with his principal owner, Peter Welsh, who agreed that he should be retired. Now, my wife Anne offered to give him a home and to take him to the shows in the standard bred lead-in class, and I'll tell you, he would have won ribbon after ribbon after ribbon, because he is a beautiful, beautiful horse. He ticks every box as a type. So we put him in the paddock up front here at home, and he would not settle down. He just would not. Horses might gallop around for 2 or 3 days, but then they suddenly relax and settle into a pattern, and they spell the way you want them to spell. Not this bloke. This went on for weeks. It was only a matter of time before he went through a fence. So eventually I decided to put him back on the jogger just to take a bit of steam out of him. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months. no thumps. Next thing, I've got the hobbles back on him. Next thing, he's ready to trial again. And apart from one or two isolated incidents, it hasn't returned. And I don't know why it hasn't returned, and neither do the vets.
So what about the thrill then to get him back to the racetrack, not only to win a race, but to get to an Inter-Dominion Series? And you mentioned get through to the final. You ran third in your heat behind XL Stride. You've had the setback in the final, but to get him back and to get him back to the racetrack in such a successful way, that must have been a really big thrill for you.
Well, for all of us, Greg. Anne, of course, had very fortunately assumed a part ownership by the time he was ready to come back. So it's been a tremendous ride for her and for his original owner, Peter Welsh, who loves him dearly, as we all do. He's a real character. He's been here so long, Greg. He outlived the Labrador.
He made a miracle. He made a Miracle Mile final. He made a Miracle Mile as well.
Yeah, he ran in a Miracle Mile, and not much went right in that race either. I'm not suggesting he would have finished in the money, but he'd have been closer had he had just a little bit more luck in the early stages. He missed the 1-1 by a hair's breadth. He had to settle for the 1-2, and that makes a massive difference at that level.
It does for sure. Now, his campaign at the moment, he ran an absolute cracking race in the Kevin Newman on Miracle Mile night, and I know that race, when he won that race, it gave you a lot of satisfaction.
Oh, well, it did, because the great man was there to present the trophy. I nearly took one of his fingers when I snatched it out of his hands after the race. But Kevin was at his absolute zenith of his career in the 1970s, when I was calling the trots at Harold Park, and I reckon I called pretty well every winner he drove in that wonderful decade where he won 10 trainers' premierships and 8 drivers' premierships. I was there for pretty well every one of them. And he was one of my trotting heroes in those days. He was the consummate professional, wonderful driver, always had him in the right place at the right time. Nobody drove Harold Park better than he did. And as a trainer, he was just in a league of his own. And to win the race named in his honour all of those years later was a terrific thrill.
The horse was back in form after that win. He was going really well. Victim of circumstance in the Tour, and then you've had a few issues. He hasn't had much racing since then.
No, very little. He's had 2 trials, Greg, but they were a fortnight apart. He in the first trial, Jim Douglas said he hung very, very badly. He said, in fact, he was flat out steering him. Now, that's not Chariot King. So we immediately investigated, and he was very sore in the off forefoot, near the toe, slightly to the outside. When we used the hoof testers, he nearly jumped over the fence. It was a stone bruise on the way out. Once you start digging into the sole of the foot to drain the infection, you can be out for weeks. So we started to poultice him very heavily and hoped we could draw the soreness out without interfering with the sole of his foot, and we got away with it, but he missed probably 4 or 5 hobble-ups, and it couldn't have been at a worse time with the Inter-Dominion heat drawing near, and I've just had to rush him a little bit. It seems that every time he's in one of these major races, some little thing goes wrong. He proved, though, last Saturday night, first up over 2,300, which isn't ideal, but what are you going to do? He was drawn 10, so he went straight to the pegs. He got held up, coming all the way around the home turn, hit the line really well, and pulled up in great fettle. So we'll back up again this Saturday night, and hopefully that'll be enough if he makes the Inter-Dominion heat. I hope he squeezes in.
In part 2 of Inside My Stable with John Tapp, we learn about John's property and how he became involved in harness racing and what the future holds for him. Make sure you join us for part 2.
This program was brought to you by Harness Racing New South Wales and the New South Wales Harness Racing Club. This has been a Harbour Television production.